Taking a look, now we reach the Ordeal Call pre-release campaign. I think based off the roadmap that the developers have given us, you can expect this quite literally as predicted to be in early May. I think this is pretty much when it's going to happen. We actually are going to get, again, a little bit of a shuffle here, as the Ilia Castle event will likely occur before the Ordeal Call pre-release campaign. So expect the lotto then into the pre-release campaign, but it may, function still in the same order, as this is not when Ordeal Call itself actually properly releases. So they still have a little bit of wiggle room, so we can definitely see what the developers try to do with something like this. Taking a look basically though at the pre-release campaign here, just to start with, you guys can see what this is going to do is it's going to have a main story AP reduction campaign, allowing people to get stuff. And again, get stuff done. And again, it's going to be the return of the sort of blue prisms, as I like to call them, the spirit vein stones, that allow you guys to have another shot at any of the events. There is a summoning campaign in association with this, and you can see it's going to include some rare units. So you have an opportunity for Anastasia, who we already talked about with the Valentine's Day event, and Ivan the Terrible. Ivan himself actually is a very strong AoE Buster Rider. He's a 30% charger that works well in the Okayest system, and he has decent damage already, but adds into that with his ability to buff strip enemies, which can definitely be useful in certain challenge applications. He also, oddly enough, has pretty decent NP gain should the situation demand it. So again, he could be a very, very decent option for you. Dobrynya is a permanent 4-star AoE rider. I do think they gave her at least an upgrade that helped her some, but to me, she still needs a little bit more of the upgrades to make her a little bit more usable. I do think she is still a very cute option, if nothing else, but she's definitely not one of the better AoE riders at the current point in time. Atalanta Altar is a single target quick berserker, and definitely has a little bit of firepower in her. What she really lacks, though, is overall survivability, as well as just really charge. So again, that is one of her biggest concerns overall, but she can still be useful to you both as a star generator as well as somebody that can actually kind of pop off if you manage to buff her correctly. Again, Vikabron here, nothing really to write home about as a permanent 3-star caster. He still does decent NP damage and has 80% charge in his kit, but ultimately not necessarily going to be people's first choice to invest in. Salieri here is, however, a story-locked AoE arts Avenger for a 3-star. So he is at least a little bit of a rare commodity. Don't expect him to do, again, like top damage or anything like that. And his looping is a little bit suspect. You can definitely make it happen. Just be careful of the times limitations on his arts up. But again, he is an interesting one due to the fact that he is story locked here. To me, honestly, I don't really advise rolling on the spanner. This one to me feels like a lot of bait prior to some of the other ones. And again, maybe a good skip after the, the actual like Lilum Harlot collab. Taking a look here, we actually go into this year's first lotto event. Now, this one's going to be interesting as it will be coming late April, as you guys have seen via the roadmap. So it is coming a little bit earlier than JP had it, almost by a month. And it is interesting because, again, it's another early in the year lotto, just like Tesla Fest was for us. Thankfully, unlike Tesla Fest, this one will not throw 31 different challenge quests at you. This one instead is a lot more metered in that regard, and its challenge quests are very much forced in terms of what you can actually bring to the node. So it makes them a lot more like easy to complete experience, which probably doesn't please the challenge community, but definitely pleases the farming community that wants to get the lotto farmed and has other challenge quests that have rewards there. So in that regard, it is a nice thing for those people, but it is an interesting lotto nonetheless. Just to give you a brief peek in here, looking at the actual lotto info, you guys can see what your materials will be here. It's going to be pages, night metals, Chains, fangs, and bones are going to all be present, as well as the usual lineup of things, though keep in mind that after box 11 you lose things like the gold and silver apples from here. So it is what it is, but there is a lot to be gained here. My general consensus advice is don't just farm the lotto just for the embers. The boxes are unlimited in lottos like this, so if you've never done a lotto before, they're usually the time to burn your apples in FGO. It's usually a great time to actually farm, and quite literally, however much you put in is however much you will get out of these sorts of events. This does make them very grindy, but it does make them extremely lucrative and rewarding. But again, as long as you're getting multiple things out of this that you like, including things like the mana prisms or the FP, all of this can be really, really valuable to you. Taking a look here real quick, though, at the actual summoning campaign for the event, you do have our first AoE quick assassin of the year, and really our second SSR in this category ever. As you guys will remember, we got Huyan Zhou in the prior year, whose name I probably just butchered. But Kashin Koji is basically going to be your Spider Girl. She is, again, AoE quick. She has, as you guys can see, 11.6k attack there. Nothing too much really to write home about, and even maybe possibly a concern, given the fact that we are an assassin. But honestly, still not a bad attack stat for an assassin. The HP value is the anemic one, though, and probably a little bit more for concern. She is a rare quick unit nowadays that actually has double arts in the deck rather than double buster. So in that regard, she does have a little bit more capability for refund via the cards. She has party-wide invincibility for 1 attack, 3 turns, the ability to self-charge 30%, as well as a 20-star bomb there on the first skill. Her second skill here increases her own quick performance by 30% for 3 turns, increases her own attack by 20% for 3 turns, and then basically gives her an effect where she will charge her own NP gauge whenever she normal attacks with quick cards. In that regard, making her a triple quick servant would have probably been better, but it is what it is. You just have to trust the devs on these things. Again, though, this will also scale with the ability and can scale up to 10% gauge whenever she uses a quick card on an enemy. So definitely something that can be useful to you. There's a chance to bound, which is a unique form of stun that's not affected by normal stun resistances. Again, this scales up to 100%. This does not mean it will occur every single time. It just means that an enemy will probably have to have some form of actual magic resistance or debuff immunity in order to stop this from landing. She can increase her own critical star absorption, increase her own critical damage for 1 turn. And again, as you guys can see here, she has basically quick up of 6% in her actual skills there, but really otherwise nothing too much to write home about. Take a look at the Noble Phantasm. It's an 8-hit AoE quick NP, deals damage to all enemies, and has a 40% chance to instant kill them. This is not a particularly high chance. Don't rely on it, especially not against, more powerful enemies, as it is very unlikely to land on them. She also has a chance to bound literally with her NP, and this can activate before the damage goes out. And then it will deal extra damage to enemies if they are bound. So again, the bound chance is only 60% base, but if they are, you are literally going to get a super effective modifier with her. This, to me, is one of her biggest issues, as it does make her damage somewhat fluctuating. You can't necessarily guarantee that it's going to land, and so if you have a high health enemy that you really need to land it against, my advice is use the third skill that has a 100% bound chance on it. But otherwise, this is at least somewhat of a concern with her. And to me, on top of that, she also ends up having a little bit of a concern with regards to her overall refund, with only a 0.5 NP gain rate, even though she does have an 8-hit quick NP. This is a little bit one of her concerns, and again, I've talked about it basically before, but this is something to watch out for with her. In my opinion, I actually don't think Kashin Koji is one of the better, assassins out there to roll for. I do think she needs a sort of strengthening or an interlude at some point to give her a little bit more of a fighting chance, as she has really just kind of received nothing since she came out. Hopefully the devs take another look at her this year and we'll see where they go. But as of the current point in time, I don't really necessarily advise rolling for her. but it's totally up to you. If you really like her design, you really like her kit, she is certainly usable and not someone that you can just go like, oh man, she's really bad. Instead, it's just one of those deals where there are so many good units this year, it's tough to actually really advise you guys to take that risk on her. Kato Danzo is going to be also on this banner. She is a story locked unit in and of herself. Kato Danzo definitely has at least had an upgrade that's really helped out her damage performance. Still, though, she does have a lot to be desired in that regard, really kind of lacking the charge that some of the other units have. She is AoE buster as well, so this makes her at least somewhat difficult in that regard. She does have damage niches that help her out, and she does have survivability at least. That is kind of one of her strong suits, is that both of her survival skills are actually targetable. But other than that, for actual like general purpose use, again, she can be used, but not necessarily the strongest unit. And then Fumakotaro just is your, 3-star AoE quick option in that regard. Taking a look at the craft essences from the event, Princess of the Fine Clothes, not really anything too much to write home about. Really nothing here is of your noteworthy value at that point. Taking a look at the second summoning campaign, we have Ilias Veal and Miu being added in. Both of them limited units. Ilias Veal is, honestly, at this point, she's come a long way. She's a 50% charging single target buster caster. So you can definitely get a lot of firepower out with her. She's not going to be anybody that's going to be like a Black Grail Looper or anything like that, but you can at least start her with 50% charge and make her 3 turns should the need require it. And she can start with Black Grail at least for 1-shot damage. So you can manage to get some really good numbers out of her. Miu, on the other hand, I still think has some issues with the overall selfishness of her kit, but they have at least addressed the major concern of her NP and how it works. She is a decent option as a support, but more of a like party and like star generator support as well as an attack up support, less so as a charge support or anything like that. So she's not going to be a conventional support in that regard. She is a relatively rare unit, though, so if you feel the need to try and get copies of her, this is going to be your opportunity to do so. And then your third banner here is also going to have Miu on it, as well as Kato Danzo, and it's going to be paired with Seatonai, another single target arts alter ego. She definitely pales a little bit in comparison to Melt. She has at least gotten some attention finally, but to me, she could use still a little bit more. I feel like at this point, Melt just almost completely outclasses her. And so while she is in a better spot, I do think she still needs some upgrades. She is story locked, so you're not going to be able to get spooked by her normally. So if you really like her, you just like the idea of a single target arts alter ego that can potentially loop in that regard, this is a decent time to pick her up. Though you do need to be careful of, again, the upcoming anniversary as well as summer units that are getting close at this point. So again, that's going to be the lotto event. I do think the lotto event for a lot of people is probably going to be a skip in terms of role, but if you do like the new units on Raid Up, or again, you desire some of the older units that are here, this can definitely be an option for you. To me, not the strongest of opportunities to roll though. Taking a look here, we also have a Nero Fest battle in New York 2022 summoning campaign that they kind of pulled back in. So for NA, this would be the 2024 summoning campaign in a weird way. But you guys can see this is going to be the return of Umu Bride as well as Umu Caster. We also have Tesla and Edison. I already talked about Tesla during the Chaldea Boys one. Edison, we haven't really talked about. He's a 4-star AoE arts caster, and honestly, what he really lacks in damage, he makes up for in utility, as he has a very unique kit with regards to overcharge and charge and some of the things that he can do there. To me, he's not necessarily a gotta have, but he can definitely be a fun unit to experiment and run things with. Umu Bride, as I don't remember if we've already mentioned her before now, but she is definitely a very serviceable, very flexible option when it comes to supports. Actually, I think we did already mention her. But again, she's 30% charge, 45% in P gain, 50% sky power mod that she can provide to the party, as well as healing, as well as defense up, as well as 40% attack up for 3 turns. If that sounds like a good deal for you, let me tell you, she's excellent at facilitating looping. So again, she could be a decent option for you in that capacity, or just as a single target Art Saber for you for actual damage output. Umucaster has gotten outpaced by Ace and Tonalico at this point, but thanks to the 5th Append, she actually can get back to her 3rd skill nowadays, so she's in a little bit of a better spot thanks to that. Still, again, not necessarily top dog in terms of damage, but she is one of the top dogs at least, and still a really, really good serviceable unit as a 50% charging Buster AoE caster. Okay, and let's see. So basically the same event Cs as before, which there's nothing really to write home about there. So again, that one is just sort of a one-off campaign. This Advanced Quest Part 15, I do believe you get yet another MLB craft essence here. I think this is quite literally when we can finally MLB the bone one. I believe you could MLB the dust one before this, but this should be the 5th copy of the bone, again, craft essence for you guys there. Again, you can expect this to basically shift forward a little bit, but it is what it is. Taking a look at June here. Now, keep in mind the way things are shifting. You guys could expect this instead to occur basically in somewhere like early to mid, like May is probably when you guys can expect this campaign to actually come out. I'd say a little bit more towards the mid side of that. But again, Ordeal Call release is going to definitely have some impacts. This is basically where you guys are first going to get storm pods. You want to make sure by this point, so by mid-May, that you are caught up on story if at all possible. The reason why? You are going to start getting 3 storm pods a day. You do not want to miss out on these. These are only given out 3 a day, and they quite literally cap out at 9. So you can't go more than 3 days without running the storm pod nodes. And that's exactly what they give you. They give you access to these unique nodes in the Ordeal Call interface that are way more lucrative than a normal node. So you definitely want to make sure you do them. There's excellent bonding opportunities here, excellent farming opportunities here. So make sure that you use your storm pods every single day. And the fact that you get 3 a day works perfectly in conjunction with, again, your sort of daily requirement to do 3 quests to get the tickets and the mana prisms. So I highly recommend, if nothing else, that you do that day. Even if you're making blue apples, at least do your storm pods once they come out. And you'll see there's usually going to be 1 or 2 nodes that are kind of going to be the best nodes for you to do. I'll try to kind of put out a video around that time advising you guys on how those work, and again, what to kind of watch out for. But the idea here is pretty much not to like fall behind on this, and make sure you're actually caught up on story so you can gain the benefit of these. There's also going to be the class score system coming into the game. I already have a video explaining that, but I'm probably going to do yet another video talking about that, a little bit more of a like highbrow viewpoint of giving you overall strategy for the class score system and what to maybe prioritize. So again, class score is going to be a really, really good thing for a lot of people. It's going to allow them to further enhance their units even more. You guys can see this is where a lot of stuff's going to come in. I'm not going to bother to talk about it because, again, this is something that I will put out further upgrades for. It's also when the master level increases. And again, basically, you're going to get a Noble Phantasm upgrade as well for MASH at this point, assuming you have caught up on story. So there is quite a bit here in terms of actual releases. This is, again, also, I believe, when we are going to be getting quite a bit of new materials added to us. Essentially, you will have Ordeal Call 0 out at this point in time. This will be basically your prologue to Ordeal Call. Again, it will not be the first of the actual like singularities for you to do, but it will at least be a prologue that will unlock. You guys can see it will come in the form of this sort of white thing, this white bar that's going to be appearing after LB7 for you. Okay, so with that, then we have the actual proper Paper Moon release on the same day. Now, like I said, expect this probably mid-May. It's, I think, the best time that you guys can anticipate it. And you can see, based off the campaign info here, you guys are going to get some login bonuses, some limited time rewards, some really, really nice thing. 0 AP for main quest from Arc 1 and Arc 2 up to LB6, and then quarter cost basically for LB7. Again, really nice that they give you this opportunity. Also, a 2 times great and super success chance when leveling up servants, but only if you've cleared the ordeal called prologue. So this is, again, they're going to give benefits and incentives to people that are actually up to date on story, including half AP Ember Gathering, but only for those who have cleared the ordeal called prologue. So if you need more incentive, please catch up on story by mid-May. Otherwise, you're going to regret it. Taking a look at the summoning campaign that's going to come out with the Paper Moon pre-release. You guys can see this is going to be the return of Nito Alter, Kukulkan, and again, Tlaloc here. So if you guys didn't roll for them the first time around, this will be another opportunity to go after them. If you maybe don't care about the Ordeal Call 1 units, this can also be maybe another benefit to you to try and roll for like Kukulkan or Nito Alter. Again, both of these units do have their own solo rate up, basically, with each one having a pairing with Tlaloc. So for those of you guys that really like Tlaloc, easy opportunity to get additional copies or coins for her. But again, it can also represent another opportunity, another banner. So this is why, like we said, the issue with rolling for Kukulkan on the outset, as well as Tiamat, is that basically both of these units are eventually going to get other banners. It's up to you to determine if this is the right time for you to roll. But ultimately, at the end of the day, both of them are very strong units, and it really bears worth your consideration as to whether or not to roll for them. Do I think rolling here as opposed to the initial release is smarter? Personally, no. I think it's probably better to roll in the initial release where it's further away from some of the other more lucrative banners, but it is up to you. Again, this is kind of going to be sandwiched right in between the Lilim Harlot collab event, as well as, again, like Anniversary and Summer. So it's kind of in a precarious spot, but if you like your chances, feel free to go for it. Okay, and then we have the actual chapter release here. Sorry, yeah, that's my bad. So this was the Ordeal Call release campaign with Storm Pods. This was the pre-release campaign for, again, Paper Moon. And this is the actual Paper Moon chapter release here. So here is the actual chapter release. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about it. We are going to get some new materials. We are also going to get class score unlocks here and basically new permanent craft essences added. Just taking a quick look at some of these, I think you can see the real interesting aspect to that is, again, finally some new 2400 attack power CEs being added to the game. You can see at MLB here, you're going to have 15% buster up, 20% critical damage, and basically 200% star absorption. Not wild about the star absorption, but certainly a 2400 scaling CE with both of these effects is definitely strong. And then taking a look over here, you can see same deal, only it's arts. So again, some really powerful stuff there. Even the 4-star at least has basically attack damage up. So some interesting aspects with these craft essences. Again, there is going to be a new trailer basically for this stuff, and you are essentially going to have, again, a broadcast probably around this time for NA. There will be multiple summoning campaigns, particularly involving Bhima and Duryodhana here on the outset. Bhima is a very interesting single target Lancer at this point in time. You guys can see he is Buster single target, which is at least somewhat of an odd addition at the current point in time due to the status of the overall Lancers. But we can talk a little bit about that when we actually get to doing his proper video. Again, you guys can see Bhima has at least fairly good attack. He's got a double Buster deck instead of a triple Buster or anything like that. And he does have double quick. Looking at his active skills, he gives himself Guts Up, charges his own gauge by 30%, which is definitely strong. It's going to allow him some sort of automate ability, as you will be able to 3-turn with him should you choose. And he's going to also have Debuff Cleanse there. The second skill is going to increase his own Buster performance by 30%, give him crit damage of 30% for 3 turns, and then grant himself stars. And his third skill will increase his own attack by 30% and then grant him an on-buff effect that he will basically increase his critical damage whenever he uses quick cards, and he will gain stars whenever he uses buster cards. So again, definitely interesting, and you can see just pretty much every single one of his every single one of his skills either increases his charge or increases his damage. He is poison debuff immune, which is another interesting little aspect to him. And again, you can see his NP is a 5-hit, though you do see a little bit of an interesting effect there. He's going to increase his own critical damage by 50% for 3 turns before each NP. He will remove the enemy's buffs as well before he NPs, so stopping Bhima is very difficult, and he will deal damage to them. To me, this is actually probably the strongest effect that he truly has, but you can see he will also deal further additional damage to them if his overcharge is stage 2 or higher. This will also change his animations. Again, interestingly enough, here you can see, unlike Arash and Qinggong's NP, Bhima's Noble Phantasm at overcharge rank 2 through 5 will always trigger 5 more hits, regardless of the enemy being alive or dead. Additionally, there are no overcharge hits at overcharge 1, unlike the aforementioned servants, which means that Bhima doesn't generate an extra 5 hits for effects like star generation. So it is what it is. Bhima can at least be a very decent option for you damage-wise, but I do feel like ultimately at the end of the day, he's not necessarily a gotta have. To me, he doesn't really do too much that's actually unique other than, again, the buff removal before his NP. I do think that's his strongest impact, but it's up to you to determine if he's the single target Lancer of your choice or if you have other options that you would prefer. He is story locked, so that is another interesting aspect to him. He is not a limited servant. And then we have Duryodhana here, who is also story locked. Now, Duryodhana is another really, really interesting one as a berserker. You guys can see he is Art's AoE berserker. So definitely interesting in that regard. However, don't expect him to rival some of the 5 stars in that sort of aspect. He doesn't have a triple arts deck, nor does he have a triple buster deck like you would expect a berserker to have. He just has a hybrid, almost like Mama Raiko's deck. So you can see he's going to charge the party's attack for 3 turns by 20%, increase the party's critical damage by 20%, basically give himself arts up and critical damage for 3 turns of 30%, and gain himself 15 crit stars, which is definitely nice on an arts unit. He's also going to increase one ally's critical star absorption, which at 5,000%, you better bet it's going to be him. Because again, he is a berserker. He is going to need all of that absorption. He's also going to gain critical stars every turn for 3 turns by 20, and then charge his own NP gauge by 10% every turn for 3 turns, as well as reducing all enemies' debuff resistance. I do feel like Duryodhana is at least a very serviceable enemy, but you can see his biggest issue that he just already has based off the kit is that his only charge that he does have is charge per turn. So in other words, looping with him, definitely something you can do, but again, not having the self-charge means it's going to limit the capacity to which he really can. He's going to deal damage to all enemies. He's also going to have a chance to reduce their quick, arts, and buster resistance by 20% for 3 turns activating first. This is not a guaranteeable effect unless you use other units. So again, I do think this is an interesting issue there. Oh, sorry, no, it actually is a guaranteeable effect there with the debuff resist down. But again, it is what it is. I'm going to say, at the end of the day, Duryodhana can be useful to you as an AoE berserker, but I don't really recommend him as your go-to one. There are a lot more stronger SSR ones. He's just kind of another also ran, a decent option to pick up, but it's up to you to determine if this is a unit that you actually want to go after. The issue with both of the new units here is that they're story locked, so you're not necessarily going to be guaranteed to get them. Otherwise, you're going to have to actually roll for them if you want them. Again, we already talked about the permanent Cs, so moving on to summoning campaign number 2, we have Kama, Lanling Wang, Jill DeRay in both their forms. Kama is, again, to me, if you can only have one single target assassin, she's usually the one that I advise people to pick up. Very good in challenge content, very good in just general application, boss killing, or farming. Because again, she's got 50% charge, she has unexpiring guts, she has overcharge, and basically has a nice scaling overcharge that lasts for multiple turns. So to me, Kama is a very, very good option for your single target assassin should you so choose. Lenling Wang is I'm going to say, situationally decent, like, arts buff support. He can be useful, especially if you need buff success chance. To me, that's kind of his major deal. But ultimately, at the end of the day, he's not going to be like the most meta of supports or anything for you. He is serviceable, but I don't think he's going to be, again, a gotta have by any stretch of the imagination. Gilderay Saber, I can't say little enough about, and Gilderay Caster is, even though his performance is not altogether that good, he is at least a fan favorite and a story locked unit, so it's very difficult for people to get more copies other than the additional one they probably did get of him. Taking a look at summoning campaign number 3 here, we have another new unit. So we have the return of Duryodhana alongside her, but we actually have Durga. So talking about Durga here, the way to understand Durga is imagine Jarcher if she had less refund but more damage. And there you would go with what you kind of have with Durga here. Durga basically has really high attack power. She is a 5-star AoE arts archer. And you guys can see, even though her NP charge rate is rather abysmal for her actual effects, she at least has high hit counts to help balance that out. She has a 50% charge skill here that overcharges the party's NP by 1 stage, 1 time, 3 turns. Definitely helps out in sort of multiple damage dealer setups, or again, basically invincible / immortal comps. Totally up to you how to use her. If you want to use her as the devoted looper, or again as a piece of the puzzle, again, she works in either. Her second skill here is self-invincibility, 3 attacks, 3 turns, giving her some stellar survivability, as this will absolutely function in a Castoria comp. And she also has a sort of tricolor buff for 3 turns here of 20% to each of the card types. Her third skill here is a increase to her own NP damage for 3 turns by up to 30%. Again, this will be sort of modifiable by way of Oberon, should you so choose. Also, the ability to change all of the command cards that she has currently in the deck to arts cards for 1 turn. So what does that mean? It means that if you have no cards of Durgas, it won't change anything, but it does also mean that if you have an entire deck of Durgas, you would have an entire deck of arts cards. So it functions extremely similarly to Artoria's ability to switch all of her cards to Buster. It's the same deal, just arts in this scenario. She also has Invincibility Pierce for 1 turn, so again, she at least has this baked into her kit. Again, you can see quite a bit of nice passive skills being added here, including an arts up. And again, her NP is basically AoE 8-hit arts. That is absolutely stellar, given the fact that she has relatively low hit counts, relatively low NP gain rate otherwise. You can see she'll increase her own damage against enemies that have Sky Attribute for a nice 50% power mod there. This does mean that this will impact cards after her NP and not just the NP, since it is a power mod. She'll deal damage to all enemies, then reduce their defense by 20% for 3 turns. So if she's looping over the same enemy, she'll begin to hit them harder, though not the first NP in that regard. And then her overcharge effect is that she deals extra damage against demonic enemies. So again, demonic and Sky right here, with demonic being the super effective modifier. Given the fact she does have overcharge in her deck as well, you're definitely going to have the capacity to get a little bit more firepower here. So Durga is going to be a very serviceable option, especially to those of you guys that never got your hands on Zenobia or never got your hands on Jarcher. Do I think you have to roll? I think she is one of the stronger units that's going to be released this year. That being said, in a year that's going to be pretty much dominated by a lot of the extra classes, Durga is going to be a little bit of an odd man out as a archer. It doesn't mean that she's bad. It really, if anything, she's actually insanely strong for her damage output, and she's actually putting pressure on some of those other looping archers to get some buffs. So to me, Durga is a unit that a lot of you guys should pay attention to. If you don't already have a good option for your AoE archer, she is somebody that you really need to look into, particularly if you want a looping variant of one that is somebody that's actually going to refund back. Durga can be your girl. She'll work really, really well in those scenarios. So again, I think she is somebody that you guys should consider. But ultimately, at the end of the day, whether or not you roll here or whether or not you delay for a later date, Durga will have other banners, so it's totally up to you to determine. Basically, that's it for the Paper Moon chapter release, aka Sosho 1, aka Ordeal Call 1. So that's going to be it coming out again right there pretty much in early May. Hey guys, we're going to pick up right where we left off for banner review again. So we had completed talking about the Paper Moon chapter release here in June. Now do keep in mind that this is likely to occur in May for NA, probably mid May. And basically each one of these summoning campaigns we've kind of already talked about. So we're going to go ahead and start off here with the 28 million downloads campaign. As you guys can see, again, just going to get some nice stuff from this. Basically get the login bonuses, the limited daily mission reward supplement as well, getting some teapots per day, and the master mission bond point gain missions here. So this is really an interesting thing because you can see they have an incentive to gain 100,000 bond points during this period. It's actually pretty easy to hit, doubly so because you have the teapots. Now, not to get too political on you guys here, but especially with Ordeal Call, the Stormpod nodes coming out, this has definitely been something I've noticed. The developers are really trying to push you to bond. If you think that sounds odd because you get free courts from that, it should. It's a little bit of a developer trap at this point. Yes, obviously there are benefits to bonding, but the developers kind of want you to bond out some of your more used units so that you roll more. This is something we've been noticing over time. They have made statements to such a degree, at least, maybe not as direct as that, but basically telling you like, oh, if you've hit bond cap, we're not going to be extending the bond cap, just roll more units. So you can kind of tell that's what their angle is with that sort of thing. So I do think, obviously, with regards to teapots and the overall efficiency of the Ordeal Call nodes going forward, just be careful with who you use. Remember, you don't technically have to like 3-turn those nodes. If you want to try to like use other units that you don't frequently use, or you want to try to like use a friend support, but don't use one of your own meta supports, and you maybe try to find other alternatives to that, it's definitely a smart way to handle it, as you'll be able to bond up more units that way, and you'll also avoid kind of bonding out some of the units that you might want to save for things like a lotto or something where you want to be efficient. You can see they did refresh the Da Vinci Mana Prism Shop exchange for this, as well as the Rare Prism Shop exchange, and they added a new permanent CE to the Da Vinci Workshop, Beyond the Rain Cloud here. This one is basically an increase to the friend points gained when using a friend support by 5. This will go to 25 at MLB, and Mystic Code experience. There are a couple of these that come out. I'm going to say they're not the worst thing in the world because, again, at MLB, you're going to get 5% of the various effect here, as well as 25 friend points. It's going to be kind of the ones that are going to be coming out this year. They're going to repeatedly use this sort of mechanic, and they're not terrible. They can at least be something where it's like, hey, I'm going to gain 5% of an effect, and I'm going to gain, again, like some additional FP. But it may just be like this is one of the only ways that you can kind of get more of this type of thing. Like, for instance, Mystic Code experience. Let's say you already have like 4 different CEs equipped for that. How do you get a 5th one in? Well, it's going to be by taking one of these CEs, and they're not the worst thing in the world to take. I don't think they need to be anyone's really first purchase, but again, we'll talk about that more when I actually remake my Mana Prism and Rare Prism Shop guides. Some other campaigns here. Again, bond points gained for Ember Gathering and Treasure Vault are increased. Ember Gathering is going to be half cost, as well as every version open. Treasure Vault is going to be half cost during this time. So if you guys are needing to restock on QP for whatever reason, remember you will have already had a lotto at this point, but you will also had things like Ordeal Call come out. So it may be to your benefit to kind of restock here, but ultimately it's up to you. You can see they add Artoria Ruler as an NPC, and then basically you're going to get a 2 times success rate for Great and Super Success during this campaign, as well as all interludes and strengthenings at half cost. I highly recommend taking advantage of this because, again, you don't get very many of these days where all interludes and strengthenings are half cost. So this is probably going to be one of the last ones you'll ever get. I highly recommend getting all of them caught up and done during that time period if you can. You can see this is where they added a new filter feature for existing craft essences. I think NA already has this, so it's not too big of a deal. And then there is a summoning campaign. A summoning campaign that's very near to my heart, given, as you can see, all the saber faces in it. So just taking a quick look here at the rate up craft essences, you can see poolside bar here is going to be your 5-star. Realistically speaking, it's okay, but the split stats don't really make it something you want to invest into. Ladies and Gentlemen is actually kind of a sneakily good one because it's a 4-star CE that is actually a crit star bomb when you first enter the field. So this one can have some uses if you're looking for a crit star bomb that's not a 5-star CE, maybe saving you a little bit of party cost at the expense of some stars. So it can be at least a decent option for you. Looking at the rate up servants here, again, just talking about them since they're pre-existing. Artoria Ruler is a really interesting unit. I do think she needs some help in terms of the damage department. She has gotten a couple of buffs over the years, and it has helped her out quite a bit with her overall usability, but I do think she squarely needs like an NP interlude or a fix to her charge skill at this point. Either one of those could potentially help her out, but basically, at this point, her NP damage is really not why you're going to go after her. The reason to go after Artoria Ruler is because she's actually a very nice crit support. You can shuffle the cards and basically reduce the available cards in a given deck down to only 2 of the units in the parties rather than all 3 of the units. This does allow you to eliminate a unit's cards and then reshuffle and see what you get. This can make it very easy to form Brave Chains, Mighty Chains, you name it. And again, it comes in conjunction with a party-wide 50% crit up, which in a double Okayest setup, or really any sort of setup that you could maybe get back to it in, is going to result in 100% extra crit damage for the entire party. This can be really nice. It can allow you to easily farm certain nodes that maybe have annoying enemies if you can get the right cards on the right turn. Thankfully, she's very consistent at doing that, so it can be a really good solution for you to try out. Ultimately, she's not a unit that a lot of you guys have to have, but she is a really fun unit to use if you understand her major gimmicks and how to actually put her to work. Okita Soji here, on the other hand, is actually a very demerited unit. That being said, her damage performance is not too bad. She's another limited summer unit, so you're going to have a hard time getting your hands on her. She is a 4-star AoE quick assassin. And sorry, I didn't say it earlier, but Artoria Ruler is a 5-star AoE buster ruler. But Okita Soji here being an AoE quick assassin is definitely something that's suspect. She actually can loop. The biggest issue is if you do need cards to sort of complete that loop, she can stun herself on the back end for NP, which can be a little bit nasty. That being said, ultimately, just to actually refund, the stun never gets in the way purely for that. So you can still loop with her, and actually, due to some upgrades that she'll be getting, she is going to become a Black Grail looper, and definitely an interesting one at that. So yes, she's not going to be the strongest AoE assassin. Yes, she's not a unit that you have to have, but she can be a decent option for you, and she can be made to 3-turn even with something like Black Grail, provided that the node actually does allow for it. Taking a look at the summoning campaign number 2 here, you can see we get all different Cs. Midsummer Moment's actually not too bad. It's all attack scaling. It's quick up of 10%, critical damage of 10%, and 3 critical stars per turn. You probably don't need the critical stars per turn in a quick comp, but hey, it is what it is. It's definitely a decent option there. And realistically speaking, nothing else here that kind of strong. Looking at the actual campaign itself, you've got Maid Altar. Now, Maid Altar is another limited summer unit. So again, getting your hands on some of the summer units, can be kind of difficult. It can be rough to try and actually get them outside of devoted summer banners. Thankfully, each year we have a tendency to get at least a banner for some of the summer units. It's just you might not see all of them in it. So there's no guarantee that you're going to see the one that you want to see, particularly when it comes to the 4 stars. The 5 stars usually appear pretty frequently, but the 4 stars often don't. So it really just depends on how the developers try to run things. That being said, looking at Maid Altar is still a unit that does a metric crap ton of damage. The issue that she has, she doesn't really have that self charge. She doesn't really have that self survivability. So she can be a little bit unwieldy for people to use that don't really understand her. But she does have cooldown memes. And what I mean when I say that is that she can actually double up her third skill without really like a Koyanskaya setup or anything like that. So it does allow for her to do what we like to call the reloaded meme. That can result in her getting a lot of damage on, again, basically wave 3, or now with the 5th append, potentially as early as wave 2. So you can get quite a bit of firepower out of that. The biggest issue, as we already mentioned, is her overall usability due to lacking charge and lacking survivability. But you can at least get good card performance out of her. She can refund back to full if you get the right cards and you get the right crits. Still not necessarily the most consistent of things to try and do. So again, Maid Altar, very good for damage, but could probably use a buff at this point in time. We'll see what the devs do with her in the future. Mysterious Heroine XX, kind of already talked about. Again, she's a really decent option as a single target arts, basically foreigner there. She can be a decent unit for you due to the fact that she has charge, she has the threat against humanity niche, and she basically actually has some survivability built into her kit. Unfortunately, it's tied to her steroids, so it is what it is, but she could be a decent pickup for you as yet another limited 4-star summer unit. Looking at summer campaign number 3 here, we've got another really, really interesting one. And this one actually has a rare craft essence that is quite valuable. This is Knights of Marines. If you're unfamiliar with it, this craft essence is a CE that can be pretty decently sought after due to the fact that it is one of the rare all attack scaling quick craft essences that actually has charge. So at MLB, this actually scales up to having basically 60% charge, and you can see 15% quick up. This is definitely a really interesting one. Yes, if it were a 50% C instead, it would probably have even greater effects, like it might have like an NP damage up or something in addition to the quick up. But it at least is going to be a decent option for you as an all-attack quick scaling CE. So it is one of those deals where if you have a unit that would function pretty well with it, maybe a unit that has like 20% self-charge and then a maxed out append, or maybe 30% self-charge and just an unlocked append, they can easily start with this CE and get themselves to full without having to use their Scotty's charge skills right away. So this is a really nice CE both for starting charge and potentially pumping damage. So a lot of people do try to kind of pick up a copy of it at least over time. You don't necessarily have to get it, but it is one of the better options that we have out there for quick still to this day, which is kind of wild given that it is a CE from the original summer event. Taking a look at the rest of them, nothing really too much to write home about, but I will say, taking a look at the units on rate-up this time, we definitely have some interesting ones. Now, I'll start here with Surfmo instead. Surfmo is actually the game's second highest refunder. She is a limited 4-star AoE arts writer, and she absolutely loops like crazy. So much so that Double Castoria usually has her looping over 200%, not even really requiring Castoria in order to pull this off. The reason why is because Surfmo was one of the game's original loopers. She looped long before Castoria ever existed, which means that she's designed to work with far less supportive meta supports. And as a result, this does make Surfmo an extremely good refunder, even when the waves are not including 2 or even 3 units. You can just instead have a single unit in some cases, and Surfmo will still loop over it. Now, the interesting part about Surfmo is that what she has in refund, she somewhat lacks in damage. This is why a lot of people will turn to a unit like Habitrot now that's, again, a welfare that's guaranteeable that can kind of out-damage her. She's certainly still a really fun and easy-to-use unit, so she can be an interesting pickup, especially due to her rarity. A lot of people don't find her to be an easy unit to acquire due to, again, her being a 4-star limited summer unit. But she can be a decent option for you. Just again, watch out for the damage if you're going to have low NP levels of her, but otherwise she's still very, very serviceable. Vertoria, on the other hand, is a unit that often gets me in trouble, and that is to say that I am of the opinion that a lot of our single target archers have been somewhat left behind. They're getting their niche overrun by units from outside of their class, and this is basically due to the fact that the developers have not actually given them NP interludes. I believe that Squirtoria could get an NP interlude and it would not break the game. The reason that other people get me in trouble over that and yell at me over that is because people feel like Squirtoria is very strong still, and that is the truth of the matter. Squirtoria's kit has never been in question. She is the game's strongest looper. So it's interesting that the game's second strongest and the game's strongest are paired together on the same banner, but there's a reason for that. They both came out at the same time during Summer 1. Both of them have also had their rates tweaked a little bit due to them being a little bit underperforming back when they released. So as a result, they are both looping monsters. That being said, Squirtoria can absolutely sit there and loop right over the top of a lot of bosses. She is a single target arts looper, and she is somebody that is really designed for the challenge content. She doesn't necessarily have the highest damage output, but it's not really going to matter because you're just going to keep NPing again and again and again and again. And without even really trying that hard, my record for Squirtoria is making her NP 12 turns consecutively in a row. So that should tell you already just how strong she can be, even when her buffs fall off. So again, it is a rather interesting unit to have. Her primary mechanic, and the thing that you should really be interested in for her, is the fact that she can drain a boss of charge. It's not a guaranteed effect, but it does have a 70% proc rate. So if you're just constantly firing off NPs every turn, odds are you can keep depriving the boss of actually getting to their NP. So much so that even in a turn where you maybe realize that they're going to maybe get the NP off, you might be able to stun them, get Squirtoria back to her NP for the next turn, and then deprive them again. So it can actually be a very hilarious thing to do. And again, it's one of the reasons that people feel Squirtoria is still so strong, despite her being a year one unit. So again, should you roll for Squirtoria? I think she's a unit that everybody should kind of consider, but you definitely don't have to roll for her. She is an older unit at this point, but ultimately, at the end of the day, the choice is yours. The 28 million downloads campaign has a lot of saber faces. It has a lot of summer units that can be rare or hard to get, but you are headed towards a new summer event for the year. So again, you're just going to have to make a tough decision in that regard. Taking a look here, we did get the Strange Fake Whispers of the Dawn broadcast commemoration campaign. I'm not sure if NA will get something like this. My mind is telling me probably not, but who knows, we may get something else similar to it, at least to get the commemorative CE. You can see they did unlock some of the interludes for the unsummoned servants, particularly Gil and Enkidu. What this means is that even if you do not have these units, you can still do their upgrades preemptively, which will mean that they will be already done should you roll the unit, but it will also mean that it will count towards any milestones that you have, so this can just get you a lot of extra quartz basically by doing them. So the general consensus is, no matter whether or not you intend to roll the unit, always make sure you do the interludes and strengthenings if they are made available to you for that reason. So whether or not we get it, I don't know, but we'll just have to see. You can see this is where we got Advanced Quest Part 16. I don't remember if this is when we get an MLB of any of the craft essences. We can just double check right here. It is not. You don't get another MLB until 17 and 18. All right. So now we move into July. Remember, this will logically be somewhat June, because basically right here, the Mystic Eyes Symphony, as you can see the time date on this, if you're familiar with when NA normally has its, again, anniversary, you can expect that this must occur before that point. So even though the start date is pretty much right when NA would be celebrating, the entire 3-week event must move ahead of it instead. That's a little bit of a problem. The reason for that is because it includes a new unit, Saber Medusa, so that does mean that it has to move ahead of it in order to not mess up the GSSR for NA's anniversary. Again, we'll just have to see how they handle it, but I think you can expect that this event will end up coming out a little bit sooner in that regard. In fact, just real quick, let me glance over at the roadmap. And yes, they said this is supposed to come out early June. So, with it pretty much taking 3 weeks, it will take up all of June and lead pretty much right into the anniversary. So, you can expect that this will happen a whole month earlier in that regard. Again, we already talked about, well, actually, we didn't talk about the actual summoning campaign here. So, let's go ahead and mention it. This was in conjunction with that. It does mean that NA then will probably get something for this. Maybe not right at this time, but it may happen at a different date whenever they decide that they wish to commemorate Strange Fake. But you can see here, this is a banner for Gilgamesh and Enkidu. We've already kind of talked about Gilgamesh, and I believe we've talked about Enkidu, but if I haven't, I'll just go ahead and mention that Enkidu is still a very, very strong permanent single target lancer. Enkidu is known as sort of the SSR cockroach of the family. If you're unfamiliar with what that terminology and jargon means, it means that Enkidu is very hard to kill. Enkidu is a very tanky character, and yet the devs still made Enkidu do a whopping ton of damage. So Enkidu is a very, very strong unit in that regard, can be very good for challenge scenarios, as well as just generalized boss killing. Also has the threat against humanity niche, so can be very useful in certain specific story fights, and definitely somebody not to be ignored. Gilgamesh, on the other hand, still really strong, still applying pressure on every other archer in the game, and it's pretty blatantly obvious to see why, due to his synergy with the likes of Oberon, and again, him just being anti-servant. You can see the rate ups here, just again, pretty much straightforward, nothing too much to write home about. There are no rate up CEs, there are no 4 stars, nothing else here. So again, if you really like either of these units, you can go after them, but they have, I believe, already had other banners in the year. Next up, we have the Evocation Festival Part 3. This will definitely be another interesting one, as it's going to be the return of some highly sought after summer units, particularly Jerker, as I like to call her, John Alter Berserker, Hokusai Saber, and again, OG Shisho Assassin. So basically, each of these is going to be a popular unit, or a unit that people were not able to acquire because they're from the earlier days of FGO. You can see there is a new strengthening here that's going to give Shisho Assassin basically an upgrade to her critical damage for 3 turns. It's going to increase her own damage against Divinity trait, which is a new effect that she didn't prior have. And it's also going to give her a 30% charge skill. This is definitely nice, as this does allow her to become a much more fluid looper, whereas prior to this point, she pretty much was relegated to starting from, you know, again, like just barely maybe like a 60 or 50% charge standpoint. This makes her a lot easier to use. So definitely a unit that you guys can consider for an AoE looper as an assassin, but I'm going to tell you again, the Valkyries are probably still a better option for those of you guys that have already acquired her. Taking a look at the actual summoning campaign, and again here, let's actually first talk about the other welfares that are here. So John Alter Berserker is infamous for having at least very strong single target damage. She's a single target buster berserker, and she can do quite a bit. She has 20% charge baked into her kit and at least a little bit of survivability with a dodge per turn mechanic. Her biggest problem is the fact that she has anemic health, and she further drains it even more. So it's something you really got to watch out for when you use her. Damage is not the issue, survivability for her is. And Hokusai Saber is a single target arts looping saber. She's actually pretty decent in terms of how much she can pack a punch, and she can be a really solid option for your single target saber. So if you're somebody that really doesn't have a lot of options there, highly recommend picking up Hoku Saber. She's one of the better welfares in the entire game, and she can be a decent option for you. Summoning campaign now, we can take a look. This is actually going to be the return of OG Shisho. OG Scotty. OG Scotty is a really interesting unit in the sense that we have a new summer form of her. A lot of people, I think, maybe think that it replaces her. The reality is triple Scotty comps are a thing. They are better for certain units. And there is also the benefit of, again, original Scotty just having that survival NP rather than an offensive NP. That can be really useful to people. She also worked pretty well with her summer counterpart, since her summer counterpart gives quick up, but instead gives Buster crit. Her original version here gives quick up, but quick crit. So this does open up more options for potential carding and critting should the need arise. Again, it's up to you to determine if you actually want to go after her, but she is a meta support, and she is somebody that you could rely on to that capacity. Again, I do think the performance out of maybe her summer version is a slight bit stronger, but it's ultimately up to you to determine who you want to get. My advice, get both of them so that you have multiple options, and that way you can also not have to rely on a friend support potentially should the situation disallow it. Theo Lancer is here as well. She's another single target, sort of rarer summer Lancer. Her biggest issue is that really she doesn't have a whole lot to kind of write home about. She doesn't really do anything wholly unique, and she's kind of underwhelming in terms of that performance. She can definitely be serviceable. You can use her and amplify her damage to still make her decent. But the issue at play here is I feel like most of the other single target 4-star Lancers are somewhat better than her to some degree. So to me, I don't really advise it. But if you do like Kiyohime, feel free to go after her. John d'Arc Alter here is, again, another highly sought-after unit. She's one of the game's original waifus, as I'll say. Not necessarily on launch, but very quickly into the first year, a lot of people were really, really gunning for her. She basically caused the Jalter apocalypse, as a lot of people will remember, where a lot of people quit the game originally because they could not get a copy of her since the gacha in original FGO was quite nasty. So... again, she is a unit that people still to this day are chasing, and she is still one of the game's premier damage dealers. She is an Avenger. She's single target buster, so that does make her a little bit on the neutral side, but she is a unit that can still absolutely pump damage. And this year on NA upcoming, she will get a 50% charge skill buff, something that she definitely can use and something that she can really pop off with. So there are going to be other strong Avenger candidates to combat her, but she is definitely going to enjoy that upgrade. Queen Mabe Saber here is, to me, a unit that is in dire need of an upgrade instead. I don't really feel that her performance is altogether that good. She does rely on landing her defense downs in order for her damage to pop off. She is serviceable in that regard, but I think she's kind of outperformed by quite a bit of the welfare sabers. She is, again, going to be an arts single target saber. To me, my advice, go with the welfare from the Evocation Festival rather than trying to get a copy of Mabe Saber. But if you do really like Mabe, feel free to go after it. She's definitely a hot character and definitely a hot unit. Hokusai, the original here, is, again, a 5-star AoE arts foreigner. She has had some issues looping over the years, but her damage has really never been in doubt. I think she kind of has gotten passed up in that regard, but she still has the man niche and still has quite a bit of a kit in order to kind of amplify that damage due to her ability to place defense downs on the enemy with her third skill, assuming you get her arts cards. Still, Hokusai, definitely a very strong unit should you use her right, and definitely a very pretty unit. Has one of the more beautiful NPs in the entire game. Osaka Behime Archer, also another unit that probably needs an upgrade. At this point, I don't really feel like Osaka Behime Archer does anything to write home about. She does have a unique mechanic where she will actually taunt you to attack one enemy, but that's really not to your benefit most of the time, so it just is what it is. I don't really feel like her damage is there. I think she's actually one of the worst archers in the entire game. She definitely could use some love. I hope the devs actually give it to her, because I do think design-wise, she's a very cute and fun unit. Taking a look at the schedule here, you can see Kyo Lancer is paired with OG Scotty. You can see Jalter is paired with Mabe, and you can see Osaka Behime is paired with Hokusai. It really almost feels like they're using the rather underwhelming performance 4 stars to instead be sort of mitigated by selling them with a much more popular and sought-after 5-star. It is what it is, but that's kind of what they're trying to do, and it was also their way of trying to bring back some of those summer 4 stars that they have made difficult to acquire over time. So again, that's going to be the summoning campaign for the Evocation Festival there. Now we get to talk Mystic Eyes Symphony. Now, just a brief blurb about this event. This is a tower event. If you've never done a tower event, what that means is you have a sort of, as we like to call it, an onsen mechanic. The onsen mechanic is like basically whenever you use a unit, they go on cooldown. So this is a type of event that incentivizes you to have a lot of units leveled up. If you're hearing this now, understand you have about 5 to 6 months to rectify any sort of issue that you might have, but you definitely should start leveling more of your roster and getting more units online in preparation for something like this, because how many units you have leveled up dictates how fast you can complete this. Thankfully, it is a 3-week event, but it is a 200 floor event, so every single floor is going to make your units go on cooldown. They will cool down faster if you put them in the quote onsen and you pair them up according to what their synergies are. Again, it's usually, I believe, a 6-hour cooldown, and it can be reduced to a 4-hour cooldown if you put them in the appropriate one. So if you have enough units, you can kind of string it along and you can actually get back to the point where your units are coming off cooldown by the time that you're actually able to kind of do more nodes. But ultimately, at the end of the day, like I said, the number of units that you have leveled up is going to dictate how fast you go through this. That being said, the bone to pick that I have with this event is the fact that in a weird part, basically, I think it's after either floor 50 or floor 100, all of the units that you are facing in every node are a servant. What does that mean? Well, it's interesting because basically everyone makes a cameo. But it's also annoying because everyone makes a cameo. What does that mean when I say that? It means every time you go into a node, if you've ever noticed, FGO has a unique mechanic where the very first time you go into a node, it quite literally will stop and zoom in and show you each one of those servants. This particularly happens usually on wave 3 of a node, if you've ever noticed it. This will happen every single node, every single floor. So you're going to have these nodes not go by very fast. It's kind of a small gripe, but it is a gripe that I found quite annoying, as this actually made this the slowest tower event for me ever to complete, which is kind of wild because I've completed numerous ones before this. It's just an annoying mechanic that I feel like they probably should have suspended that feature for. But it is what it is. It doesn't make the event bad. It just makes the event take a little bit longer. Ultimately, at the end of the day, though, still a fun event overall. I am going to say, kind of looking at this, the summoning campaigns are going to be interesting. So right off the rip, you can see we got a new servant here, Saber Medusa. Let's go ahead and let's talk about her. So Saber Medusa does at least have some decent attack power. She's a single target quick saber, and you might be thinking like, oh well, Saber Astolfo exists, Okita exists, you know, like I maybe already have options for this, maybe I use Caesar or something like that. But Medusa is going to bring something to the table that you haven't seen before. So for starters, she also has the triple quick deck. She does have at least decent HP. And then as we go look at the skills, she has a chance to petrify, which is again just like bound, another unique version of stun. This does mean that it will not be impacted by normal stun resistances and things like that, though magic resistance, stuff like that, can still kind of counter it. Gonna increase her own critical damage with quick cards for 3 turns, grant herself a buff on attack that whenever she will attack with quick cards, inflicts curse of 500 damage for 5 turns to the enemy. Again, this is a rather interesting feature. Don't mistake the 100% petrify chance with totally guaranteed to happen every time. Like I said, units with magic resistance or debuff immunity can absolutely put a stop to it. The quick crit damage here, though, is strong at 50% and will synergize quite well with Scotty or Summer Scotty. Her second skill here charges her own NP gauge by a whopping 50%. So right there, she's already differentiating herself from the other options. You're going to charge the party's, increase the party's attack for 3 turns by 20%, so a standard charisma there, and increase the critical damage of demonic allies for 3 turns by 30%. Her third skill here is basically going to grant herself invincibility for 3 attacks, 3 turns, debuff immunity for 3 times 3 turns, and her own critical attack chance resistance for 3 turns by up to 30%. You really only want to level this one more for the cooldown rather than anything else. But again, you can see there is a whole heck of a lot of survivability built into this. This is a very, very nice skill. And again, just a brief thing to denote, she herself is not demonic, so you're not going to gain the demonic allies benefit for herself in that regard. The thing I would like to call attention to is her NP. It is a 9-hit single target quick NP. It deals damage to one enemy. It deals super effective damage to enemies that are man attribute, and it has a 40% chance to petrify them for 1 turn. It will also increase the attack of allies that have the Earth attribute by 20% for 3 turns, which she does. So this will include her as well as any other unit in the party at that point in time. From there, her overcharge effect increases her own quick performance for 1 turn, activating first by 10%. And the thing to take away from this is due to the 40% chance on the NP, as well as due to the, again, effect of the first skill here having a 100% chance, you can kind of stun lock enemies as you loop over them. This is something that we actually see later in the year again, but it is an interesting thing that they started it kind of with, Medusa here. But I do really feel like Medusa Saber can be a very good option for you. Her damage is quite solid, and again, that ability to potentially keep looping and stun locking enemies can be also pretty nice. So it's up to you to determine if this is a unit that you need, but I think a 50% charging unit to that degree is almost never going to be bad. You can definitely make her perform quite well. She could be a Black Grail looper for you, and she could be a unit that really does have decent card performance due to the nature of her deck and her kit. So ultimately, at the end of the day, you can decide whether or not to roll for her. I, for one, will be, but it's up to you. Again, it's going to depend on your role priorities if you need a single target saber, and again, the proximity to other banners, especially if you're free to play. All right, so taking a look at the craft essences that are going to be available on Rate Up. Sweet Blood here is an Ignore Invincibility, Arts Up, and NP gain up of 15%. Definitely not a bad one. Could stand to have a little bit more in the arts department. I'm sure at MLB this goes up to like 5 or 6%, but still it could use a little bit more firepower. Still, it's going to be a decent one for at least NP gain. Flower of the Sun, nothing really to write home about, and Be Shelved, nothing really to write home about, although it is a rare CE that has a sort of minuscule amount of starting charge. The summoning campaign for the second one is going to include Kyokute Bakin, a AoE arts writer. She is a limited unit. She does actually have a pretty decent kit. I do think if you're somebody that's like rolling around with Habitrot, you probably don't care too much, but Bakin can do some interesting things, particularly with her middle skill. She's got it on a targeted basis, and it has a ton of steroids baked into it, including a tricolor buff. So it is a rather nice skill to have. It does make her a little bit like variable. She could be used to take out a node herself while buffing someone else, or she can be your devoted looper. It's totally up to you to determine if that's something that sounds nice to you. She's basically the dog whisperer of FGO. So again, it is another interesting unit to have, but ultimately your choice as an older unit. Hessian Lobo is going to be the other 4-star here. A lot of people overlook Lobo, but for a lot of people, Lobo is actually their best single target Avenger. A lot of people don't realize that he actually does do quite decent damage, and he does have death procs. His biggest issue is his overall survivability and his ability to kind of keep getting back to an NP. Ultimately, though, you can set him up for success if you put him in the right comp, so I do think he is a very serviceable option, as he is a rare single target option for the 4-star Avengers. Same CEs there, so nothing too much to worry about. Summoning campaign number 3, we have the return of Huyan Zhou. So, again, apologies if I butcher her name, but basically Huyan is a very interesting AoE quick assassin. To me, She's the game's first AoE quick assassin of the SSR variety. We did just get Kashin Koji, was it? Earlier in the year with the Ilia lotto event. And again, she is going to be at least a sort of like foil to her, because to me, I feel like Huyan Zhou is a little bit more usable, has a little bit more of a straightforward kit. If you like Kashin, feel free to go after her. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's really going to come down to, do you actually need a quick SSR AoE assassin? You might feel like you do. That's totally up to you. Again, I do think she's very serviceable in that regard, but I would like to see her maybe get some love. Her big thing that she has is, again, her ability to kind of have her niche in play. Again, as you guys can see here, she has the evil alignment that she can kind of deal with. So that can help her out quite a bit. And so I do think she can be a decent option to go up against, some of the other competitors for the AoE assassin category. Huang Fei Hu is basically nothing to write home about. He's a permanent single target buster rider. He's serviceable, but to me, really doesn't do anything noteworthy. I don't really feel like most of you guys should be rolling him for other than collection purposes, but totally up to you if you really like his design. Summoning campaign number 4 here is going to be a little bit of a doozy. We get the return of Miss Crane, who is a very, very solid unit. She is, again, a interesting one in the sense that she facilitates sort of plug suitless party swapping without killing anyone. So that can have its value, especially in challenge compositions. You can also make the units hit harder when they do. Balbon Sith is yet another story-locked single-target quick archer, and she is a rather good one, with her being a 60% charger that has the ability to skill seal enemies. She also has invuln baked into her kit, and again, a drain with her being a vampire. I do think she is a very, very strong single-target archer. Up to you as to whether or not to go after her, but she is usually a unit that does receive a lot of banners. Medusa as a 3-star is what it is. She's a decent AoE option, but she's not the hardest hitting, but she does at least have a little bit of charge in there. Galatea, we already mentioned and talked about back during the Valentine's event, so I'm not going to talk about her here. Gorgon is an interesting buster AoE Avenger. She has at least got okay damage, but she doesn't really have any sort of loopability. Thankfully, they did finally give her some amount of charge. It's not a whole lot. You can forcibly 3-turn with her. I don't really recommend it. But again, a lot of people like her just based purely off of her design, so if you feel like going after her, feel free to do so. Medusa Lancer here is at least a serviceable single target Lancer. We were talking about Kyo Lancer earlier in that regard, and I feel like Medusa Lancer is a better option in comparison to her. She is single target quick, she can loop, and almost like her Saber form, does have the ability to sort of stun and charm lock enemies, kind of locking them down. Her damage is okay, her refund is okay. Her biggest issue is she doesn't really have charge, so to speak, to actually get back to it by force. So you're going to have to rely on good card or, again, proper support to get her there. Vitra, we've already mentioned before. She's actually a pretty decent AoE arts Lancer. Sathino. So Sathino is a permanent... I would call her AoE, but she's really not. She is a permanent support assassin. That is to say, she doesn't have a damage dealing NP. She has a death procking NP, and that can death proc some fodder enemies. But ultimately, to me, her biggest use is actually as a little bit of a sort of kind of in the same way as like Liz Lancer, sort of a pseudo support that can be used to buff divine allies. And that's where she kind of gets a like doubled up charisma to that degree. Urael, still a very strong single target arts archer. I know you're looking at her and thinking, what do you mean strong? She's a 3-star. Yeah, she's still a very strong single target arts archer, particularly against men. So again, you guys can see the rate ups here, basically the pairings. It's definitely an interesting one, but we'll just have to see, again, if this is something that you guys actually want to go after. To me, I don't really recommend any of these. I don't think any of them are strong enough to really warrant you rolling out of turn. But if one of them is a unit that you have your eyes set on, feel free to go after it. Just keep in mind, we are getting very close to anniversary now at this point. So from there, that is the Mystic Eyes Symphony. We'll have the 2900 days anniversary. That's usually just some additional courts. And then we get the actual anniversary pre-release campaign. So again, all of this will probably be occurring now in like late June, early July. And you guys can see the pre-release campaign for Anniversary is going to get you quite a bit of stuff. As usual, Anniversary does have a ton of rewards. The issue here is that some of it is a start, dash, and comeback campaign that you will not be eligible for if you are continuing to play the game. We basically also got the wrap up and celebration of the final episode of Fujimaru Ritsuka Doesn't Get It, but I believe we did get season 2 of that as well that finally just finished right now on JP. We did get some memorial quests for this. Again, remember, memorial quests are going to be how you get your tickets that are going to allow you to pick from one of any number of amazing craft essences. Again, you're mostly after the art of these Cs. They don't really do very much for you gameplay wise. So a lot of people like to collect them just based off the cool designs. We will go over that when we actually do a proper anniversary video. But again, I'll just kind of gloss over it for now. I'm not going to look too much into the memorial quests. Again, you can see the rewards were pretty much what was already displayed. Anniversary Cs are right here. Again, you usually can pick 2 of them. As we mentioned, you'll get the tickets from doing the memorial quest. There's a damage high score event. They always put this on. There's no actual reward. This is just bragging rights. So feel free to participate in that if you so choose. There will be a summoning campaign for this. So you do have Moriarty. I believe I already talked about Moriarty. He is a very strong single target archer. He's Buster. He's 50% charge. He has the ability to change all of his allies into evil attribute, which can be useful depending on what you're trying to do. Leonardo da Vinci Writer is sort of the game's premier arts looping writer at this point, at least when it comes to party support. So Da Vinci Writer can not only herself automate a bit of the looping process, but also help charge her allies up to full. She can be very useful in sort of scenarios where either, again, you're looping her over all 3 waves, or potentially you're trying to get somebody else charged up to get to their NP. The biggest issue that she's going to have, though, is damage output. So again, just be careful about that sort of thing. If you want to go after additional MP levels, it can definitely help you out. And then there is going to be your timings, though again, remember, this will be subject to change on NA due to the date differential. And let's see, they did put out the soundtrack for the 4th edition at that point in time on JP, and they did reveal some of the summer units that were going to be upcoming at this point in time. All right, so with that, now we have the actual proper 8th anniversary. Just to talk about this again, there are going to be the 10 great campaigns. I'm going to gloss over it a little bit, but I will give you a little bit of a teaser here. So again, you can see the cumulative login bonus that gets you some nice rewards. The Destiny Order summoning campaign will be back. And again, you can see the amount of trolling that they're doing with who they featured on this. Little did people know at the time, but basically, the beasts have been left out of every normal GSSR ever since they've been released. So realistically, they've only been available on Destiny Order campaigns, and that has been a little bit of a problem that people have highlighted, especially since Draco herself did not get a whole lot of banners. We do get a lucky bag summoning campaign, aka normal GSSR. I'm not going to really go over that with you guys because, again, to me, that's less of a banner and more of a choose your own adventure. Again, my advice, at least that I can give you, is always roll GSSRs. If you're going to spend any money on the game, they are the cheapest that you will ever really be able to guarantee yourself an SSR. So in that regard, it's very much like bang for your buck. That's how I usually choose to approach it. Even as somebody that wails on the game and has a ton of the units already, it's still at least the option to maybe get additional NP levels. Or heck, maybe even a USO. Not that anybody likes really getting USOs. So again, Lucky Bag Summoning Campaign, highly recommend. Basically, for the 4th campaign here, you have the Anniversary Master Missions, as you guys can see. Some decent courts to be gained from that, as well as main progress count missions. So again, if you have cleared any of the story chapters all the way up through these, you will literally just get credit for them. If you've already done them all, you will already have all these basically unlocked for you. If you haven't done them all, you will have to complete these in order to get all of them given to you. But you can see there's quite a bit of quartz there, up to 30. And then they also incentivized you to unlock a class score sign in other words, to start using the class score system. If you did that, you got even more quartz for doing so. The 5th campaign was basically main story clear missions. Again, 30 more quartz basically for 6.5, 7.1, and 7.2. Servant strengthening quest, they updated the milestones to have greater amounts since again there were more strengthenings that happened over the course, so they added 40 more quartz for that. Basically they upped the interludes only by 10, and the reason for that is because they really did not do very many interludes. The free quest clear missions, basically for clearing all of the free quests that are available, they gave 30 more for that. And then here you go, your next big incentive, clear all of your advanced quests. You don't have to do this now, but this was the devs realizing that people were absolutely sitting on them and not doing them. So they started adding in this incentive. You can see clear 48 advanced quests is the top thing there in order to get the last reward for all of that. But there's quite a bit of quartz there. There's also going to be one for class score unlock. Again, the more you do in the class score, the more you're going to get here. This will be difficult for people to get automatically right off the bat. Some of them, if you guys are on the cusp of things, you may be able to get them all. But again, other people will probably be lagging behind and not have as much progress on their class scores. Remember, their milestones, you'll keep getting them even if you don't already have them complete. You'll get them over time whenever you do complete them. There'll also be half cost... Great and super success chance up of 3 times. All daily quests being half cost, with again every type of field being open for Ember Gathering and training fields, and also the Storm Pod Bleached Earth quest being half AP. This is where I think they finally realized that this was a good idea to do, and they started working this in, as JP now does half cost Bleach Earth quests during every event that they run. And this is because I think they realized that people were not doing their storm pods during events because people didn't want to spend the extra AP. So definitely, I hope that's something that they implement early on NA. We'll see what they do in that regard. But again, this is just sort of an AP saving feature because I think they realized people wanted to do, again, the other campaigns here. They didn't necessarily want to spend all of their AP on the storm pod nodes. The 7th campaign is the update to the Mana Prism Exchange. Basically, this is when they started adding back old craft essences that previously had been unacquirable. So as of anniversary this year on NA, you will finally be able to purchase things like Golden Sumo again that you maybe wouldn't have ever had the opportunity to if you are a newer player. So you can definitely see some interesting stuff there. You've also got a new monthly renewed inventory for the Mana Prism Exchange after you clear the Ordeal Call Prologue. What does that mean? That means if you haven't cleared it, these won't be available. If you have cleared it, you will now be able to buy a singular faux pas as well as a single copy of both HP and attack gold foes from the Mana Prism shop. This is absolutely great news. The problem is this is absolutely going to skyrocket the number of mana prisms that you need in order to be able to purchase this every month from the shop. Be very careful with how you use your mana prisms. This is one of the reasons why when I was doing the things they could improve for 2025 video, I talked a lot about mana prisms and how there's actually a huge drain and it's very difficult for new players to be able to purchase everything. Again, this is one of the reasons why. So it's a nice thing to have, but it's definitely going to put an increased strain on players. However, this is the one change that they have made. As of this update, you will also now get mana prisms every time you summon in the Quartz Gacha. What does that mean? You will not get it from FP summons. You will get it from Story Banner, limited banners, you name it, but not from FP. So again, you can see 5 mana prisms are rewarded for every quartz that you summon, for a total of 50 for a multi-spin. So definitely another thing to denote there. Again, you can see the reward is auto redeemed. Players don't have to go to like the mailbox or anything. It just literally, it'll show you at the very bottom whenever you summon that it's there, and it'll give it to you. So definitely some nice stuff in that regard. Basically, it says no mana prism is awarded if the player's mana prism inventory is full. I'm not even aware that there is a cap to mana prisms. If there is one, that's wild. I wonder if I will ever hit it. But basically, you can see summoning with tickets doesn't give any mana prisms, so be very careful about that. And the +1 bonus summon, according to them, also does not give one. Tutorial summon, Destiny Order summon, and Lucky Bag summons, however, do give you the mana prisms, so there is at least some benefit to that. Looking at the 8th campaign here, you can see basically permanently main story quests will be half cost now until LB7. In addition, again, you will have limited time Spirit Vein stones that are going to get added. So again, the blue prisms basically. And they've also, at that point, they basically added them to the Mana Prism exchange shop. But again, these are timed, so realistically speaking, nothing too much to write home about. The 9th campaign is going to be the storage slot expansion for just normal storage. So servants, craft essences, and command codes are all going to gain 50 to 100 slots. And basically, the second archive will also have a purchasable version for more mana prisms that will increase the number of slots for both servants and craft essences by an additional 100 slots. The 10th campaign is just your servant strengthening campaign. It is going to be the next thing on the list, but we're going to talk about some of the other stuff, particularly your anniversary servant that's going to be coming up here. There will be a trial quest for her, and you will obviously have at least a singular ticket reward for that. The Da Vinci Workshop as well is going to have some limited time items that'll be in addition to its normal stuff. So again, you guys can see some of it does have the requirements for the Ordeal Call prologue clear. So that is going to be an issue. And again, just the normal Rare Prism Exchange, as well as they will be permanently updating the Rare Prism Exchange to now basically say that, again, part of the Rare Prism Exchange inventory will become free of charge when conditions are met. So basically, some of these old craft essences, they're now saying, hey, you know what? We realized this is stupid. Players really need some of these CEs. If we attach a rare prism cost to them, players are not going to be able to get them very easily. Because again, free-to-play players don't have an easy source of rare prisms. They can eventually get them without necessarily like burning a higher rarity unit, but it usually takes them a little bit of time, or they have to wait and get lucky from a campaign. So what this does is this makes, while they do still require the rare prism, it will instead be free or refund it to you once you fulfill the conditions. If you want Chaldea Lunchtime, you just have to clear Fuyuki, and then it will basically put it automatically, well, sorry, not automatically, it'll basically make it free cost, rare prism wise, for you to unlock. Then once you unlock it, you'll still have to pay mana prisms, but it won't have that rare prism cost associated with it like it did in the past. So again, clearing story gets rid of the rare prism unlock requirement, though you still will have the mana prism unlock requirement for all of these CEs. Definitely a nice thing. I certainly like this. This gives players even more reason to do story, but ultimately it is what it is. Players are going to complete story at whatever pace they can kind of manage. Couple of game updates here. This is literally when the 20% starting member bond point bonus came into effect. I criticized this one. I still disagree with it to an extent. This to me made the devs' intention of trying to bond out your most used units very obvious. And the reason why is because it only impacts your starting line. If it instead applied to units in the back line, this would have actually been more beneficial to the masters, and it would have allowed us to backline bond units faster. Instead, now we are bonding the units we use faster, thereby making it so that we hit the bond caps a lot quicker. Yes, it does result in more quartz force in the short term, but in the long term, it results in you being less efficient if you don't change your units around or summon more units, which is what the dev's intention is with this. Basically, you also have a servant list function to sort by rarity at that point. You also have class group options. Again, I believe NA has all of these already. They did also update the extra mission UI here, but yeah, again, I think that's all the updates really had for that. We already talked about the pre-release campaign, so we don't have to talk about that. Let's talk about our summoning campaigns. So first up here, we do have some rate up craft essences. They won't be rate up for Destiny Order. And actually, yeah, okay, so there are rate up Cs and there are new CEs that are being added that are not on rate up, so they're just added to the permanent pool. You basically have a new version of Vessel of the Saint that's debuff immunity 3 times with arts up. It's at least a decent option if you manage to have it. And again, basically here with Chasmatis, or however you say it, Chamatis, you have an all attack scaling starting charge with overcharge and NP gain. So again, like kind of like demonic bodice Vada to an extent, but really a interesting CE. I do think it could be a useful one if you have an overcharge gimmicked unit, but otherwise not something you really have to have. Meanwhile, the unit on rate up is another honorable mention for one of the stronger units coming out this year. Now, when Ace came out, this caused a lot of commotion, primarily because a lot of people did not expect her. That is to say, this is Morgan Le Fay, just in a sort of different alternative form. That is to say, if you've read LB6, and I don't want to get too much into spoilers, you're going to definitely see that there are some other things going on here. But a lot of people were not expecting this rendition of the character to actually be released, and it also ends up being your summer version of Morgan Le Fay. So this caused a little bit of commotion because it meant that for the first time ever, our anniversary unit was also a summer unit. And this definitely made people kind of go like, what the heck? You know, I can at least understand some of the criticism because really only her third form is the swimsuit form. So this does cause you to not really get a full like summer variant of the unit. Instead, it's kind of halvesies with anniversary and summer. And so at that point, I do understand some of the criticisms there. Irregardless of any of that and how you feel about the unit, I can at least point to the gameplay of the unit. You see, Ace the Savior is a very strong AoE caster. In fact, the game's strongest AoE caster to date. She has 11.8k attack, only 13k HP. Again, you can see a double Buster deck here with double arts. She is a Buster AoE caster. Taking a look basically at her, you guys can see her active skills. She starts out by charging the party's gauge every turn for 3 turns by 10%. Definitely just a nice little easy way to automate charge. She'll gain critical stars every turn for 3 turns, up to 10, so pretty much a fragment of 20-30 right there. She will charge her own NP gauge 50% right off the rip of activating this skill. This makes her a 50% charger, and then she will increase her own NP damage for 3 turns by up to 20%. This is something that again can be further boosted by Oberon. All of this on a 7-turn cooldown. The hilarious part is she's actually gotten stronger now thanks to the inclusion of the 5th append. So the fact that this can now be reduced even further to a 6-turn cooldown means it can operate conventionally twice in a double Koyanskaya setup, turning her into a Black Grail Looper. And that definitely makes her strong in that regard. Her second skill here is a little bit of a doozy. The way I would choose to think about it is basically the less health she has, the more attack she gets. So she's going to increase the party's attack for 3 turns and then further increase the party's attack dependent on basically how low their HP is. The less health, the more attack. So again, you can see it's base 20%, but then it scales 10% when each of these sort of benchmarks of 25% are met. Basically, just by virtue of putting a Black Grail on her, you will be guaranteed to get at least the 99% one. So again, there is some interesting value here. All of this on a 5-turn cooldown, meaning you can get back to this skill very fast, effectively. Her third skill here is an interesting one. It is one of the more unique skills in the entire game because, as you can see, this skill starts on cooldown for 5 turns. That is, when you first enter the node, you will not be able to use this skill right away without doing things. It will literally have a 5-turn cooldown. Why? Well, for starters, because natively it's a 10-turn cooldown skill. So, needless to say, you're not going to get back to this skill a second time, probably, at least not in conventional farming. Maybe in a challenge scenario where the node goes on over time, but not very quickly either at that point. It's going to start with a 5-turn cooldown. It's going to charge the party's NP gauge by how much, you ask? By 50%. This is a party-wide 50% charge. And it is very strong. It's going to increase the party's NP damage for 3 turns, further by 30%. This means that Ace has 50% in her kit, NP damage up, and then grant the party gut status 1 time for 3 turns, reviving at 3000 HP. Now, the thing about this is, with a 5-turn cooldown, especially with the 5th append in play, you can very quickly get back to this. You can quite literally get this by pretty much the 2nd turn, should you choose to double Koyanskaya, the node. So again, a lot of really easy to get buffs and charge here. Just keep in mind a couple of notes. You can see the forced cooldown can be reduced by normal cooldown reduction, so you can get to it fairly quickly. And again, the NP that she has further reduces this as well. So the standard cooldown takes effect after you get and pop the skill the first time, but it starts on that 5-turn cooldown, making it really strong due to the fact that it is just a busted skill in a nutshell. Taking a look at her Noble Phantasm, it is a 5-hit AoE buster NP. It will also grant herself invincibility for 1 attack, 1 turn, activating before damage. It will then deal damage to all enemies. It will then deal extra damage to any enemy that has evil alignment, and this actually scales with her NP level. This is not an overcharge mechanic. The more copies of Ace you get, the more this goes up. This is a super effective modifier that scales with NP level. It is disgustingly good in that regard. It's going to reduce their defense by 20% for 3 turns, activating first, and then basically it's going, or sorry, not activating first, activating after. So the more you NP against an enemy over and over and over again, the more likely it is to actually, again, like, be able to make her hit harder. The more you're going to be able to pump damage, basically. Her overcharge effect is going to increase her own buster performance for 1 turn, activating first. Again, this is 30%, which is a strong overcharge mechanic, and it's going to reduce the cooldown on her 3rd skill, specifically by 1 turn each time she uses this. So pretty much already after turn 1, this will go down from 5 to 4 automatically. It will go down from 5 to 3 due to the NP, and then from there, you're pretty much the double Koyanskaya pop away from achieving this. If you can get cooldown reduction from any other source, 1 Koyanskaya would be enough right there off the rip to get back to it. So you can see, this makes Ace very strong. She is a absolute monster just due to the scaling of her kit. She is worthy of the designation of an anniversary servant in that regard. So don't let people scare you off of her due to their feelings about, should you have a summer unit at anniversary or not. Regardless of that, she is the strongest AoE caster currently in the game, and she definitely scales well and has still held that at least at this point in time. We'll see if anyone passes her, but should you consider getting her? Yeah, she's strong enough that you should consider getting her. Do you have to have her? No, you do not. Some of you guys may be relying on a really robust like Caster, or again, maybe just somebody else like Caster Umu or Da Vinci. You name it, it's perfectly fine. But Ace is definitely going to be a good solution to certain nodes. So it's up to you to determine if she's someone you need to have, or if you feel like you can get the job done with other options that are out there. To me, personally, I do recommend rolling her, but it's up to you to determine whether or not you have the courts to spare right there. The second summoning campaign is going to be the return of, well, just a lot of units. It's just kind of par for the course at Anniversary here. So you can see we've got the Trung sisters, who are a very strong single target Art Saber. They're actually very good at sustain and keeping the party alive, which makes them pair very well with the likes of Castoria, who does not really have sustain in her kit. So definitely a very strong option for you. Interestingly enough, even though they have quite a bit of healing and party support, they actually still hit like a Mac truck when it comes to being a single target Art Saber. So they're very strong even in the damage department as well. Mama Lancer definitely in a much better spot now that they gave her an actual buff to her third skill, giving her the charge. It definitely helps her out. She still needs an NP interlude if you ask me. I don't really necessarily recommend rolling for her unless you're a huge Tamamo fan, but she can still be a very serviceable option due to the fact that she's Buster. Constantine, as we've already mentioned, I believe earlier, but I'll just kind of briefly mention again, does get a nice buff that actually does allow him to be a lot more usable. He's not going to be, again, the end-all be-all or a unit anyone has to have, but he can be a lot more fun to play now that JP actually did give him some attention. He went from being one of the worst SSRs to at least being a usable SSR and somebody that can be fun in defensive and challenge scenarios. Space Ishtar is still very strong. She has actually been surpassed by a lot of the other SSR AoE Avengers in terms of damage output, but it doesn't really matter because she's sort of a Swiss Army knife. She can change her card type to whatever she wants it to be with her NP. She's still a 50% charger. She still hits really hard, and she still scales really well. So ultimately, the fact that other units have outdamaged her doesn't really matter. She's still a very good option for you. Tyra no Kagekyo is still a really strong and hard-hitting single-target Avenger. She's single-target quick. She has a ton of survivability. She will get outpaced by Jalter, especially after Jalter's upgrade, but ultimately, at the end of the day, Tyra is still a very, very difficult-to-kill unit, so excellent for challenge scenarios. Super Bunyan did finally get a buff recently on JP that helped her out. This definitely helps her stand out in the face of a unit like Melt, but admittedly to me, Melt is still the stronger option. So whether or not you go after Super Bunyan is up to you. She is a limited unit that probably doesn't receive a lot of banners, but ultimately at the end of the day, I don't really necessarily recommend it unless you just are really a huge Bunyan fan. Van Gogh is, when we're talking fun units to use, she is absolutely the epitome of that. She is a stun-locking, crit-happy, technically arts NP, but I'm going to say quick-centric foreigner. She really likes to card, she really likes to crit, she really likes to lock down enemies, but definitely not a, like, sort of meta unit in that regard. She's still just a very fun option. I do recommend checking her out. You don't have to roll her, you don't have to have her, but she can be a valuable tool to your Chaldea if you use her correctly. Fran Saber is a limited 4-star from Summer. She definitely could use some sort of attention in the way of a buff at this point. She's actually extremely loopable due to how much NP gain she has in her kit. She's single target quick, but ultimately at the end of the day, I feel like she could use maybe a little bit of bump up either in the automative processes like straight charge, or again, maybe even something in the way of damage to help her compare against some of the other Sabers. Saito Hajime is a very loopable single target Art Saber, definitely an option. I don't really find his damage to be altogether that good, and he is going to have some stiff competition with some of the other welfares that already exist, but he can be a serviceable option for you if you like him. A lot of people like to refer to him as Virgil due to his outfits. So again, if you like Devil May Cry, he may be a unit that's just for you. Calamity Jane is an interesting unit. She is a single target quick archer. Her damage from her NP is not altogether that strong, but what she lacks in that, she makes up for in sort of unique party supports. Especially with her third skill, she can provide buff success chance. So it does make her at least a little bit unique. She is, again, another fun unit to use, but not necessarily a meta unit by any stretch of the imagination. Alter Ego Lambda, aka Melt Lancer, Melt Summer, if you will, is another limited AoE arts unit here. She is a decent option. Her damage is really her biggest issue because her fluidity of looping is absolutely great. Again, she has at this point kind of gotten some stiff competition in the way of Percival, who is a permanent unit. I can definitely say that there are a lot of Melt fans out there and they will absolutely attest to her good performance. But again, damage is probably going to be her biggest sort of problem. Daiko Kuten, do not overlook the 4-star AoE Black Grail looping caster rats. You might not think much of them because they are quick, but they do have fluidity in their kit and a very easy to use sort of setup that does allow them to start from 0% charge and does give them a little bit of staying power even if the node throws a wrinkle or two at them. So I do actually really like Daiko Kuten. They're one of the better 4-star AoE casters, if you ask me. Ushi Wakamaru Assassin here is going to be a little bit of an odd duck. Actually, I should say odd flamingo due to the way that she stands. But essentially, she is a 40% charging AoE quick assassin. She definitely doesn't have a whole lot of firepower in her kit, but she's absolutely a phenomenal star generator if that's something that sounds great to you. People have called her the 4-star Jack before, and it definitely fits in that regard. But I will say, ultimately, at the end of the day, her primary niche is her ability to remove offensive buffs. It's ultimately an okay niche. I'm not going to say she's a bad unit by any stretch of the imagination, but to me, she could probably use a little bit of a damage upgrade at this point in time. Say Shonagon Berserker can actually card pretty hard. She does have a triple buster deck, even though she's a single target quick Berserker. I do feel like you basically go crit meme or bust with her. Her damage, to me, is ultimately not her strongest suit other than for carding. So again, it's up to you to determine if she is a unit that you really like, or you maybe prefer other less Genki units, as I like to call it. She's a very happy-go-lucky type of character. And again, you guys can see the overall breakdowns there, as well as the craft essences that will still be in play. So here is going to be your banner timings for all of that, and your pairings. The lucky bag, basically, as we already mentioned, I'm not going to really go through and break it all down for you guys. You can see you do get 12 banners divided by 2 groups of 9 female and 3 male banners sorted by their year of release. That's going to be how it's going to work. It does use premium currency only, as usual. And again, it just kind of is what it is. So pick your poison. You can see there are other, again, options here with the males, but basically, I'll go through that when we actually do something for anniversary. The Destiny Order is also going to be another one. It costs even more premium currency than a normal GSSR. But what Destiny Order is, if you've never seen it, is a GSSR where you can slot in the units that you wish to receive for each class, and you are guaranteed to get one of them. You will probably not get multiple. But again, you get to choose which units are possible for you to get. So this can be a really nice thing for you to target certain units. My advice, don't have buyer's remorse. Don't put a unit into one of the slots that you don't actually want, because I see people do this all the time and then they complain that that was the unit that they got instead of the other unit that they really desired a whole lot. To me, Destiny Order is still a great tool. People just have salty grapes basically over, again, like not getting the things that they actually wanted. So that is going to be FGO's 8th anniversary in a nutshell. NA's 8th anniversary, I'd say. And we do have the Servant Strengthening quest. Just to very quickly talk about this, this is basically going to be when Salter is just going to become an absolute nightmare of a unit, as she will have, again, the scaling basically with her Buster Up. Bradamante definitely gets a very nice charge skill here. Again, this is when Mama Raiko is also going to get her 30% charge and really sort of come into her own. Again, Karna gets his 30% charge here, so he no longer has the scuff 25%. This is going to turn her into the Black Grail Looper that we've been mentioning. Again, Anastasia's finally going to get some cooldown reduction and at least some benefits to her charge skill, including an additional arts up to give her some more firepower. Kiyohime Lancer stops, I'm going to say, stops being as bad and at least gets some attention. She could still use more. I hope they do give it to her. Basically, Summer Abbey definitely gets some attention, just kind of improving her overall damage. It is one of the criticisms that people had for her. And then day 7, oddly enough, they decided to give the best looper in the game 30% charge. I'll take it as a Saberface fan, but that was definitely one of the upgrades that I went like, what? Okay, sure, why not? And again, Gawain got his NP interlude there. So overall, a very well-received set of strengthenings for the anniversary, but not necessarily like the ones that people thought were going to happen or the ones that people were maybe looking forward to. So there was at least some contention overall with that one. Taking a look at August here. Again, we are now outside of NA's roadmap, so we have no idea when any of this stuff will occur. You can expect some of it will probably slide forward a little bit. There was a Learning with Manga Volume 4 release campaign. Really nothing too much to write home about. Whether or not NA gets anything for this, I don't know. We might get something where they serialize it into English, or again, maybe they'll just hand out the craft essence, or maybe we just don't get it at all. We did get the summer event here, and this is when Nocnaria is going to become available. This is basically the event that everyone referred to as LB6 Summer. If you're unfamiliar with what that means, well, I'm just going to go ahead and tell you should go read LB6, because if you haven't read LB6 by this point in time, you will get spoiled by this event, and they will kind of warn you about that. Again, the clear requirement is only Fuyuki, so you don't have to do too much in order to access it, but needless to say, this will deal with a lot of themes that were present in LB6, so I highly, highly, highly recommend it, that you go read. Again, I'm not going to go too much into it. It is a normal summer event in every way, shape, and form that you can imagine. We are going to focus over here on the summoning campaigns. So for summoning campaign number 1, you have one of, if not the most sought after unit this year, aka Artoria Caster Berserker. I know that's a mouthful, but it's because Castoria, this is her summer Berserker form. Don't ask me why they chose this naming convention. I don't really get it. To me, they should have chosen some sort of like meme name, but it is what it is. I like to call her Zerktoria, so from henceforth, this is what I will refer to her as. Look at the rate up craft essences here. You do actually have a decent one with Dazzling Moon. It's critical stars every turn, Buster up, and overcharge 2 stages for 1 time. Again, the artwork here is phenomenal, but otherwise, nothing too much to write home about the rest of these CEs. Taking a look at the overall units here, I'm going to have to talk quite a bit about Artoria Caster Berserker, aka Zerktoria. Zerktoria is strong for a couple of reasons, and there is, again, a reason that everybody is pretty much looking forward to this unit. She is just a total monster when it comes to both charge and damage. She is a single target arts berserker, so that already should clue you into, oh god, this may get really broken. So she has over 12k attack, still an anemic level of HP. This actually may be the lowest of any 5-star. I don't know. I'd have to double check. But again, as you look here, you can see the NP gain rate might leave you going, oh god, that's not too great. Well, it doesn't really matter. Hit counts are actually very solid. And you're going to see real quick, based off the kit, why she is strong. She will increase her own critical damage for 3 turns by 50%. She will increase her own critical star absorption for 3 turns by 5,000%, which is enough for a berserker to actually soak the stars. She will then charge her own NP gauge by 50%. So right now, we've already established she's a single target arts berserker with 50% charge. That right there is just strong right off the rip. Her second skill charges 1 ally's NP gauge. She has a targetable charge skill of 20%, just like her caster form. And again, it's going to overcharge their MP by 2 stages 1 time for 3 turns, which means when you inevitably use this on herself, she will gain this benefit herself. It's also going to further increase the party's NP generation rate for 3 turns by an additional 20%. So she is now a 70% charger with overcharge and NP gain. Her third skill is going to improve her own arts performance for 3 turns by 50%. It's then going to gain herself 10 critical stars every turn for 3 turns. It's then going to grant herself invincibility for 1 turn. Realistically, this invincibility is one of the least used aspects of Castoria. And you'll learn why here in a second. So, the 50% steroid, if that wasn't strong enough, let's keep going. Looking at the NP, she will grant the entire party. She has a 6-hit single target arts NP. It grants the entire party solemn defense for 1 attack, 1 turn. So I say, like, the invuln is actually not going to receive that much use because the entire party's getting solemn defense every time she NPs. It will then deal damage to 1 enemy. It will then deal super effective damage to threat to humanity enemies. It will then further reduce their critical attack chance by 20% for 3 turns, making it less likely that anybody even does get a crit off. But even if that were the case, by the way, she does have a unique passive that stops you from being able to really have a good chance of critting her already passively. So stacking that with this effect is going to make most units just incapable of critting her. At least not without some sort of stacking on their own end. But then we get to what actually does make her broken. Her overcharges. You see, Castoria Berserker has 2 overcharge effects. 2 50% power mods against Chaotic and Divine. And let me tell you just how many bosses and servants and things fall into this. Oh my god. This has been one of the most used units for me for general purpose boss killing or high node farming because of these effects. These are very, very pervasive traits to have. And again, they are both 50% power mods. They can both stack with each other for, again, additive scaling right there. And then basically, due to the overcharge, they can each scale up. If you remember, she has a 2 ranks of overcharge 1 time for 3 turns. She will have kind of base 75% against any enemy she's trying to kill due to this second skill. So yeah, you can make Castoria Berserker absolutely nuke units from orbit. It's hilarious. And again, due to the 70% charge and the fact that she's an arts unit, she is pretty much brute forceable in any scenario. This is insanely strong due to that. And we didn't even mention the fact that, again, she does have 20% from mana loading. So you can pretty much get her 0 to 100 with very little outside investment. Castoria Berserker ends up being just one of the strongest units in the entire game at this current point in time for this. This is a unit that every single one of you this year should be considering. Should I roll for this unit? You do not have to have this unit, but this unit will make your life in FGO easier. This unit will perform well for you, no matter the NP level that you get her at. And that is definitely something to be said, that this unit is a strong unit. Again, I'm sure if you basically go out there and you ask anybody which units they're looking forward to over the coming year, Castoria Berserker will be one of the units that gets mentioned again and again. So as we mentioned before with certain other units, I cannot stress enough that you guys should consider rolling for this unit. It is my recommendation to do so, and not just because I'm a Saberface fan, but simply because of how useful and how strong this unit has been. In fact, as an anecdote for that, I had to try to stop using her because she was bonding so fast for me that I was worried that I was going to run out of efficient ways to use her very quickly. So I had to start finding alternatives to not completely bond her out pretty much overnight, because I started to use her in so many of the storm pod nodes, so many of the 90++ nodes, and I basically realized I am just hyper fixating on this unit and forcing this unit to bond out extremely fast. That is how useful she has been. That is how powerful she has been. So again, it's up to you to determine if this is a unit you want to roll. But I will say there are other considerations that are going to make this banner very lucrative for people. So taking a look at the other units on Raid Up, we have Suzuka Gozen next. Suzuka Gozen is a Black Grail looper in and of herself. You will require quite a bit of investment in her. She is an AoE quick unit. So her being an AoE quick writer means that she's going to be at least a little bit susceptible to node structure. That's probably her biggest issue that she's going to have. But ultimately, at the end of the day, she is very strong, and as we mentioned, a Black Grail looper if the node is right. She increases the party's attack for 3 turns by 20%, increases the NP damage of any summer mode servant allies, which will naturally include herself, by 20%, gain critical stars by 15 here, and again, increase her own quick performance of 20% with her second skill. She's then going to increase critical damage of 50% and give herself a buff on attack that will increase her own attack by 10% for 3 turns whenever she lands a crit. Her third skill will increase one ally's NP generation rate, basically herself, so it's a targetable skill of 30% NP gain, which is really good for certain quick units, for 3 turns, and again, reduce their skill cooldown by 1. This can be obviously used on her. It's not going to be the greatest effect, but it could be something that might be beneficial if you're outside of a 3-turn window, and then it's going to charge her own gauge by 30% as well. So like I said, her looping, especially with the NP gain with the charge, it's fluid enough that she can Black Grail loop. Her NP is a 5-hit AoE quick NP that ignores invincibility for 1 turn and then increases her own damage against lawful alignment by 30%. This is a 30% power modifier because you can see it has the 1-turn duration. It's going to activate before the damage goes out, but this will also impact any cards that you use after the NP. So again, it will then deal damage to all enemies, and then it will deal super effective damage to Earth attribute enemies. So again, if you can find something that's both lawful and Earth, she will absolutely annihilate it. It's definitely a sort of feather in her cap and something that you can use really effectively. And I'm not even going to talk about the fact that she's basically the game's first race queen, so she's definitely a hot commodity in that regard. So again, Suzuka Gozen, definitely a very fun unit and definitely a very interesting unit, though just be careful about node structure when you go to try to loop with her. But realistically speaking, the big reason I think a lot of other people are going to try to roll is for Kuro Avenger here. Now, Clo von Einsburn, if you guys have never seen her before, is a very interesting unit. We were actually just talking about her before I began recording here, and you guys can see just kind of already that she will be a valuable asset to anybody's account based off of what she is capable of doing in her kit. So she is a single target quick Avenger. That in and of itself can be useful. She can be a decent damage dealing option for you. But realistically, most people are going to use Kuro for what we like to call the Kuro system. If you've never seen it, the way this is going to work is this is going to allow other units to get charged based off the number of enemies they hit with their attacks, particularly their NP. This is going to basically allow certain units to expand their looping capability. I have an entire video talking about this, so I'm going to try to do a very surface level explanation of it. But you can see it's going to increase the party's attack for 3 turns by up to 20%. It's going to increase the party's critical damage by a further 20%, and then basically give everybody in the party a buff on attack for 5 attacks over 5 turns, that for the next 5 attacks, whenever they hit the enemy, they will gain a stack of manuscript completion. The interesting thing to denote about this is NPs only consume 1 attack. Even though they hit multiple enemies, will only count for 1 of the uses. This does mean you basically just get to keep using it in a conventional 3-turn. She will also grant herself a buff on attack for 3 turns that whenever she basically attacks with her quick card, she will gain critical damage of 10% up. So again, definitely an interesting skill, but where is the payoff for this manuscript completion buff? Gonna be basically in the 3rd skill. We'll talk about that coming up. The 2nd skill here is going to grant one ally gut status 1 time for 3 turns, so it's a targeted skill. It will also grant herself prepare revision buff for 1 time. What does that do? It literally will rotate her to the back line. So again, as you can see, it will put her in the last reserve slot after 1 turn. So when you pop this skill at the end of the next turn, boom, you are gone. So quite literally, sorry, at the end of this turn, you are gone. So quite literally, you are going to have the ability to rotate the party again without killing someone. This is very useful. Again, you can see you can only move if there are 2 other party members left in the field. That is to say, you can't rotate to the back line if there's not enough members to fill the front line. There has to at least be something there. Her 3rd skill is going to increase the party's NP damage for 3 turns by 20%. It's also going to charge the NP gauge of allies with the manuscript completion status by 10% per its stacks. So this is where the Kuro system really comes into play. The number of enemies you've hit is the number of manuscript completion stacks that you have. The number of stacks that you have when Kuro activates this 3rd skill is the amount of charge that you will get in 10% increments. So if you've managed to NP and hit multiple enemies, you're going to keep getting more charge due to this. So usually what people try to do is they try to activate this skill either on the 3rd turn of a loop to get the most charge, or on the 2nd turn so that they can rotate Kuro out of the party using her 2nd skill to bring in a 3rd support. Otherwise, you're not going to have easy access to things. So what does this mean? It means kind of like how Miss Crane rotates the party without killing somebody and allows for an additional support. So does Kuro. But Kuro is a charge support where Miss Crane is purely a damage support. Kuro also does benefit in terms of buffing the party's damage a little bit, but her ability to increase the charge of your devoted looper means that you're going to have access potentially to better craft essences and better starting situations. This means that the unit might be able to pop off even harder and gain even more damage. This is why people really like having a copy of Kuro Avenger. That being said, there's obviously some downsides. 1, she's a 4-star, so your party cost is going to be a nightmare for you, especially considering this will end up taking up what usually amounts to a single devoted damage dealer, 3 supports in addition to them, and Kuro. That is 5 of your party's 6 slots right there. You're pretty much guaranteed to have to use MASH as a backline unit for party cost reasons. You're going to have to be very careful with what craft essences you can bring because of the nature of this composition. So depending on who your damage dealer is, the lower the rarity, the more party cost you'll have. But the higher the rarity, obviously, then you're going to be really hurting for space. So this is one of the bigger drawbacks to her. The other big drawback is a very convoluted and clunky system. You have to actually think and understand how it works. You have to order the party appropriately so as to not mess it up. And you have to absolutely activate the skills in the correct time on the correct turn, or else you will again mess it up and end up screwing up your loop. So again, she has the capability of expanding how many units can actually Black Grail loop or start from 50% charge. The problem is she is going to be a unit that in many ways a lot of people don't want to have to use due to how many button presses and how much thinking they'll have to do to use her. She is a very powerful, very unique, and very fun unit if you understand her. But again, a lot of people will feel like they don't want to have to go through all of that for every node that they run. So again, is Kuro Avenger good? Yes. Let's take one look at the last aspect of her kit, her NP. As you can see, she has a 9-hit single target quick NP. It deals damage to one enemy and then deals super effective modifier scaling damage to enemies that is based off the number of manuscript completion stacks she has. The issue at play here is, remember, she redeems the manuscript completion amounts with her third skill, so you have to be a little bit careful with how you use this. That being said, she has a guaranteed drain on her NP, which can be very useful, and an overcharge that stacks for multiple turns of quick up, even though it is only 10%. So again, Kuro Avenger, a very useful unit depending on what you're trying to do, and very interesting with what she can do to, like, you know, again, meta compositions and things that you're trying to do for either farming or challenge. That is going to be the benefit of rolling this banner. This is going to be one of the most rolled banners of the entire year, and for obvious reasons. I do think, again, this banner is worthy of consideration, not just because of Artoria Caster Berserker here, but also because of Kuro Avenger added in. Not to mention Suzuka being here is just icing on the cake. So, up to you to determine if you want to roll here. I highly recommend it, but it is still not something you must do. The choice is yours. Ask yourself if you need a good single target berserker, if you want somebody that has a whole lot of charge that they can automate that with, or again, if you want something like Kuro that's going to allow you to have some fun, maybe reaching Black Grail compositions and things like that. Up to you, but ultimately, again, this is a very, very solid banner and one of the most solid ones in the entire year.